what this is my dissertation research as well as some other research projects that I'm looking at. Namely, I'm examining how the development of the Alberta oil sands has become increasingly controversial and international as a debate. Stakeholders have been categorizing this resource as oil sands, as tar sands, as bituminous sands, and more recently as dirty oil, ethical oil, snake oil. Each of these terms is overflowing with meaning and values based on scientific, economic, political, environmental, and Aboriginal cultural rationalities. And rather than fostering an engagement with and an understanding of stakeholders' positions, this debate is creating divisiveness. Stakeholders are talking past each other rather than with each other. So rather than showing a consensus and a productive debate, I don't have such a good story to show you today. So what I'm going to do is I'll outline how various stakeholders define oil and water, and how by understanding others' definitions, hopefully we can develop a consensus position from this. So first of all, I'm going to talk about how people are writing about the oil sands. So based on an extended examination of over 12,000 LexisNexis articles, I'll look at how oil sands have been categorized through time, and I'm relying on semiotics, looking at the meanings associated with oil and water, especially evaluative oppositions such as dirty and clean, certain, uncertain, life, death, man, nature, desired, undesired. And I'll look at how these are variously combined to create new meanings and messages. The meaning mapping also illustrates how conversations about the oil sands have changed through time. I'll also examine how the issue is framed, and I'll present a sample of advertisements from various stakeholder groups, environmental groups, oil sands companies, to look at the visual rhetoric embedded within these ads. So I examine how they frame the oil sands as an economic, environmental, human rights, or preservation of life debate, and how they create resonance by invoking evaluative meanings from the broader conversation to create identification and motivation with their target audience. So what have we seen? Well, attention has grown exponentially. So again, this is a 12,553 LexisNexis articles. So that's an online database of media articles from the 1970 to 2011. And it averages 53% growth per year. So there's an 11-fold increase in attention paid to the oil sands since the beginning, since 1979. So it's again, an exponential growth in attention. The conversations are also quite different. So besides the media, I'm also examining hearing materials. So I'm looking at hearing submissions, the transcripts, and the decisions associated with that. And you can see that within the media, the discussion is much more about oil. And yet within hearings, it's much more about water, about land, water and land. So the focus is much, much more different in terms of where the attention is being paid. So very different in terms of private versus public conversations. This is a mapping of the use of the term of oil sands versus tar sands. So how is this resource being categorized? How is it being described? In the early 70s and 80s, it was commonly described as tar sands, and it was not a pejorative term. It was just a term, a descriptive term. However, increasingly in the 1990s, the switch was, okay, can we describe this then as oil sands, reflecting it, oil as a resource as opposed to being tar, something that you put on your roof. So it's something you put in your tank, something that has value, as opposed to something that you would just simply use to tar your roads. But interestingly, we see a switch in 2007, 2008. Oil sands really rockets 2007, 2008, and then more recently in 2009, 2010. Tar sands has become more predominant, and it has really gained that pejorative flavor. It's really meant as a tarring of the oil sands, or a re-tarring of the oil sands, if you will. And it's primarily used by opponents to the oil sands. So when you say someone describes it as tar sands, you know immediately what their position is versus someone who describes it as oil sands. So it's become a very divisive means by which they can describe this resource. So what I've also done is I've also mapped the meanings associated with this resource. And so what I did is I examined a software that basically slides along the text and says, okay, now what words appear together using a 7-word window width. Each time one of my words from my semiotic categories pops up, the frequency is counted. Each time it appears together in a window with the other word, then a link is created. And this is effectively a network map. Oil, you can see here, is very central to its meaning. The size, so its position is central. The size of the word also reflects how frequent it is in terms of appearing within these LexisNexis articles. And then the size of the link shows how frequent it is linked with, so oil with tar, oil with word, with world, oil with should, with natural. And then the color associated with it is, I've done factor analysis to then say, okay, now what words or what grouping of words are significantly more likely to appear together than others. And you can see here that it's predominantly a monolithic discussion, if you will. All words appear together, except interestingly, no and never in the bottom in magenta. And then up in the right, near in McMurray, and on the right-hand side in blue, interest, nation, home, conflict. Those sorts of words are appearing, so they're kind of starting to cleave the discussion. In 1989, we're starting to see some more separation in terms of meanings, so really developing discourse coalitions, if you will, or a split of the coalitions. So you have oil and bitumen, resource potential in purple. In the top left, environment, should, international, world, earth, good, like. In the right, new, life, fund, region, equity, near, McMurray. And in the right, some more economic meanings, value, sale, interest, foreign, enhance, public, best, justice, earn. So again, a real split of environmental in the blue, more economic in the green. And what's interesting about this too is that it's not exclusively descriptive words that are being used, but there's also evaluative words, normative, as well as emotional. So things like good and things like justice. So really having this effective and evaluative nature associated with these meaning systems. So it's not purely about dry economics or dry technical. There really is a lot of emotion and a lot of moral underpinnings for a lot of these meaning systems. 1989, again, it switches back. It's much more monolithic. You know, you've got a bit in terms of today and the possible in the bottom. On the right, it's a near, world, land, McMurray, bitumen. So again, more of the discussion about what does this mean in terms of development for the local people. 2005, we're starting to get a lot more attention being paid to it, and it's becoming much more distributed in terms of like, it's almost like an explosion of meanings, and you can see that very visually. It's just like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? And really is a split in terms of, you know, it's basically two conversations. The red, which is oil, world, new, tar, like, natural, and then the green, which is good, interest, need, environment. So it's really interesting in terms of how we're seeing this kind of a bifurcation of sorts. 2006, again, it kind of shuts down. It's much more monolithic. You've got oil, and oil is very big, very central, very predominant, a bit in terms of private, safe, earth. In the green, you have free, small, like, dividend, respect, sale. So that's interesting. It's like, it's a mix, again, of kind of this evaluative emotion plus a bit of sale, dividend, respect. So it's economic along with some justice conceptions, which is very, very interesting. 2007, again, it tends to be more split in terms of the different kinds of conversations going on. 2008, again, real red and green. Again, sort of more of a bifurcation in terms of what the discussion is about. 2009, split. 2010, more split. 2011, more green and red. I mean, this is a lot of information. You're like, okay, what is this actually telling us? And visually, it's a means of showing what the conversation's about and what sort of splits are you getting in the discourse in terms of meanings. And again, it's not strictly economic meanings, technical meanings, political meanings. They're not separate discourses, they're not separate communities of discourses. It's indeed these different conversations are drawing from each other in really interesting ways, and also having this affect and this moral normative, and they're all drawing from those sorts of aspects. And the next stage for me is to dig down into these conversations, to say who's talking about it, in what ways are they talking about it. So that's kind of where I'm going next with this. So it's really also being categorized, as I mentioned, dirty oil, ethical oil, snake oil. So this is just a graph showing the Google searches performed relative to the total number of searches done on Google over time. So I just want to show you just predominantly how is this resource being categorized, how are people talking about it, what meanings are they ascribing to it, and what's happening during this time period. So we have Al Gore in 2006 when he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He's quoted as saying the oil sands threaten our survival as a species. And when junkies' veins collapse, then they inject between their toes. The oil sands is the equivalent. So very emotional, very visual, metaphorical language he's using. In 2008, in April, 1,600 ducks died on the tailings ponds. So again, 2008 was a real spike in attention paid in the articles. So then you can see then is a real attention. Again, dirty oil is really quite predominant. Tar sands, dirty oil and the future of a continent. Andrew Nikifork published that, and you can see then a resultant spike in the use of dirty oil as a term, as a category following that. Dirty Oil, the movie, was released in February 2010. Ethical oil was a response to this dirty oil and Andrew Nikifork's position. It was published in November 2010, and you can see that ethical oil then spikes as a term. And on that basis, the Ethical Oil Institute was funded and started up. And again, then the ENGOs responded. This is an ad they ran in Variety magazine prior to the Academy Awards. It's a call out to James Cameron saying, look, we've got our own Avatar sands. And this was actually sponsored by 30 different ENGOs to say, okay, now this is our Canada's own and our world's own blight, parallel to Avatar. So the Ethical Oil Institute, again, was formed, and they started running a series of U.S. television ads, primarily on the basis of human rights versus, as their argument, human rights. We're not conflict oil, we're ethical oil in comparison. And it was fairly successful in terms of that ad campaign, and it became a real hot button in U.S. politics with regards to renewable energy and the funding of that, and broader questions of development, energy, security, and indeed Obama rejected the Keystone Pipeline of January this year, or set it off at least. He delayed decision on that. So the point here is that the oil is this oil resource is being categorized in very different ways on the basis of different meanings and values embedded within the broader discussion, and it really can have material impacts in terms of how we talk about it, affects how we think about it, affects how we regulate it, and it can be a real political hot potato. So how is it being framed? So within this broader discussion of meanings and this broader categorization, I'm also working on some stuff with Heather Graves. She's in English Literature and Film Studies, and we're looking at the visual rhetoric embedded in the ads themselves. Okay, what kind of conversations are they having? What meanings are they invoking? So we selected some ads looking at how are they explicitly linking to the oil sands and these ideas of how this is, how is this resource being categorized? The relationship between image and text, because that's important. This is a very visual resource, and it's very emotional. And these ads really do use the visual and emotional in a very powerful way, in a rhetorically persuasive way, in a means by which they can take a once legitimate energy source and make it seem illegitimate. Something that we've taken for granted, always taken for granted, never questioned, has become questioned in a way that really has surprised many people. So again, we've taken a series of ads. This is the first ad I wanted to show you. This is by the Ethical Oil Institute. And what it is they really did create a parallel ad looking at ethical oil and conflict oil, creating, again, the parallel, so the thesis of the ethical oil versus the antithesis, the conflict oil. And it's interesting in terms of how they create this isocolon. Sudan's oil fields, Indigenous peoples killed, versus ethical oil. Canada's oil sands, Aboriginals employed. So it's the same sort of beat. Isocolon, the same sort of conflict oil, ethical oil, so it's a nice parallel in terms of that. And also, it creates an us who hire Aboriginal peoples versus them who kill their Aboriginal peoples. You look at the Aboriginal woman is a close-up. She's healthy, she's got beautiful teeth, she's protected, she's safe. She's looking at kind of an exalted glance over her right shoulder, saying, presumably to her employer, like looking up to heaven sort of look. Versus on the left-hand side, we're actually making eye contact with the skeleton. And we're on parallel with the skeleton. Meanwhile, the soldiers' backs are turned to us. So the soldiers are turning their back on their Aboriginal peoples. They're unwanted. They're left. No one cares about them. So here we are making post-mortem eye contact with the skeleton. So really, it does creates an ethical appeal to say, what kind of person are you? Where are you buying your oil from? And a real emotional appeal. So it's the dead, unwanted, dehumanized versus the happy, healthy, productive, wanted. So it really does say, okay, now what kind of person are you? Where do you get your oil from? And both are a close-up. So it's an interesting parallel in terms of how they then construct this idea of ethical oil versus conflict oil. And indeed, what they're doing is they're creating effectively a legitimate category of an ethical oil country and placing themselves within it. And then, by comparison, creating this illegitimate category of conflict oil countries. Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Iran, as evil cultures that devalue women and devalue their Aboriginal peoples. So it's really a human rights sort of argument that they're saying. Okay, so it's conflict oil, they don't value human life, and it really is the intent that viewers should boycott oil from conflict oil countries, right? Buy your oil from Canada, we're ethical in comparison to conflict oil countries. And in response, we've got Tanker Free BC, which is opposing the Northern Gateway Pipeline. And again, they've created a very interesting parallel of ads that engages with but counters the previous discussion with regards to human rights. And how are they doing this? They're saying, again, a very parallel structure in terms of immoral energy, ethical energy, right? And balanced phrases, and also the isocolon, elements of equal length, like at any price, life valued, our energy future, the real choice. So it really does lay out the entire argument in terms of both pictures are extreme close-ups. You've got the eye contact from both creating demand, right? So it's not an object. It's not an object that you can look down upon. These are subjects, right? These are demanding your attention. So on the left-hand side, you're looking at the duck. How can this duck be alive? It's so covered with tailings. It's surprising that it's still alive. The bear, it's a bear family, right? So it creates identification with the family. And it really does ask the viewer to say, or implied, you have the wrong priorities. If fueling your cars, if furnaces are worth a bird's life, whose side are you on? The bird is really asking, whose side are you on? So immoral energy choices value economics over the environment and human convenience over animal, bird, or health and life. So it really does demonstrate the value of all life, not just human life, and making the previous argument moot. It's not just about human rights, it's about life and valuing all life. So again, it's really interesting in terms of the categorization of oil. We've got ethical energy as kind of the legitimate category where all life is valued, and then the creation of an immoral energy at any price, an illegitimate category. And it's how do you then push oil companies who are producing oil at any price into this illegitimate category that sacrifice animal life for energy profits. And again, it's illegitimate categories provide a new moral order, saying oil companies threaten all life, not just human life. So it really does look then broadly at the emotion associated with it, the normative implications of your choices, of if you categorize oil in this manner, what does this mean to you in terms of your decisions of where you're getting your oil from? And interestingly, we looked at a series of ads also from BP and Greenpeace, and it's about how do they then structure themselves as legitimate pushing them as illegitimate. Greenpeace looks at establishing themselves as a legitimate environmental steward, false environmental steward, and then finally this last series that I showed you here, oil sands is the ethical oil source, and yet Tanker Free BC pushes them down to say, look, you need to value all human life over animal life. So it's some broader, again, we look at a series of these articles to say economic, environmental, political and human rights, and then valuing of all life. So it's a series of articles or series of ads that we've looked at. So in some, meanings and values about the oil sands are drawn from broader discourse. And the meanings of oils has really shifted. So it's not simply about a technical discussion of the facts and some sort of emotional discussion about the environment or human rights. It really is a mixture of all of these. The different actors are drawing from these different meanings, and the normative and emotional are permeating all meaning systems in a really powerful way. So it's not about these dry engineers who are only talking about the technical, or the economists, or about the political science folks. It's not this separate discussions. They really are intertwined in terms of their meanings. And again, the debate has become increasingly visual and emotional in terms of the types of images they're using, and very sophisticated rhetorical methods by which they're accomplishing this. And lastly, the productivity of stakeholders' conflicting framings remains to be seen. From what it looks like, it's creating more divisiveness than actual productive discussion about what is this energy source and what does it mean to us and how should we regulate it. So there you go. Thank you so much.